Hello, my name is Matthew Eisler, and I'm a historian of science and technology at the University of Strathclyde. Well, I've spent a lot of time researching the history of clean technology for about 20 years. So looking at the history of things like fuel cells, batteries, clean energy conversion, and electric cars. So looking at the relationship between public policy, environmental ideology, and industrial policy and industrial practice. Well, environmental regulations are ubiquitous. They impact almost everything that we do, whether we know it or not, in one way or another. Sometimes we see the direct impact of an environmental regulation, for example, with recycling. And we can see the materials set up. We can see the interface with this idea of a circular economy. And we can also see the effects in, for example, automobility and transportation technologies of all different kinds. We can see how clean energy conversion, propulsion technologies have been implemented. So these are some of the obvious ways that we can see the effects of public policies, but there are in fact many ways in society that are impacted by environmental regulations that we don't see. And this is what I'm sort of interested in my current research, looking at the ways of life, some of them not always obvious, that are shaped by ubiquitous environmental regulations. And it has a lot to do with how we move in the world. Since everyone is thinking in environmental terms these days, it's very hard to find someone who hasn't thought of an environmental problem or question in one way or another. And so that shapes the way that we move in the universe. Whether we know it or not, consciously and subconsciously, in all kinds of ways. And so this is the area of research that I'm now moving away from looking at how policymakers and engineers and scientists and the public help create new technologies, to looking at how maybe attitudes about human beings in relation to each other and in relation to non-human things, living and non-living, how that's changing in an environmental society, and trying not to look at the obvious things that we see, and there has been tremendous change in energy technology, but there's some of the less obvious things. How do we live in a sustainable society and treat each other and the non-human world? These are sorts of the questions that I'm interested in looking at now. This is, I think, a great question. And so the short answer is all kinds of ways. Maybe the most obvious ways happen through post-secondary education. We can see new kinds of specialisms being created that feed into and that serve the sustainable economy, green industry of all different kinds. And the curriculum at universities around the world is changing in response to public policy demands. And so that's one way that we can see that. And then I think work practices are also changing as new technologies come into the marketplace, and also new ways of making things. So I think a lot of the focus in public policy has been on the consumer. How does the green consumer change their behavior? And these are great questions. And what has been much less focused on is how does green production shape social relations. We don't really focus as much on that. And that's really what I'm trying to do in this new project on green work, is to look at how public policy is shaping new work practices. As we see these public policies, the Green New Deal is taking effect in Europe and in the United States. And so that's when we can see new class formation, a new class of green workers. And what is green work? It can be almost anything that you can imagine. And I have my assumptions coming from the history of science and technology, of clean technology and energy conversion, propulsion technologies. I have some assumptions about what that should look like. But that's a very limited view of the universe. And even though I try to imagine the universe outside of my experience, my research experience. And so I like to talk to people about what they think green work could be, and to think about their own practices, whether as a consumer or they may well be in an industry of some kind that has been greened and whose practices have changed. And we may not be aware of that. And so I'm trying to develop awareness and also to expand the imagination of the green new world that we're building and how we're going to live in it. I think a culture of research is a community that has a lot of different perspectives. And this might sound like a cliche, but interdisciplinarity is really hard to achieve institutionally because of accounting mechanisms. And so we know that interdisciplinarity is a good thing. We've known it for a long time, and we try to bring people from different perspectives and with different skill sets and different sets of expertise together in all kinds of ad hoc ways. But then, unfortunately, there's an accounting process that accounts for funding in our society that tends to cleave back and recreate silos. And so I think being aware of institutional processes, how they can overcome institutional boundaries, but also foster them at the same time, and understand how institutions work like that, and how people can work with institutions so that they're more able to cross boundaries and to develop deep and meaningful engagements with each other. And so I would say that a culture of research is one that is inclusive and that is diverse and that engages all kinds of views without fear of censor. And to have a freedom of speech to be able to talk about the complexities of the contemporary world. And so that would be my answer to that question.